myself as the talk to either you or your kids' chemistry at Moravia High School. It is wonderful to see so many people here. I really appreciate the turnout. It's great.
It's not working.
Not working. You better.
Well,
Jack, they're up there.
Oh, okay. Is that better?
Better.
Sorry. It's great to see such a turnout. It's just wonderful that the community has this much interest and people are willing to get out on a Wednesday night. I think it's great. As they usually say, just a few housekeeping details here. In the event of a fire, well, gosh, this is the firehouse, you know. We'll have it put out right away. Don't worry about it. So I wanted to tell you that each of just the format of tonight's speaking, each of the speakers that we have for you is going to have 20 minutes to give a presentation. They are talking about different aspects of the situation. After that, there's going to be a 30-minute period for questions and comments. Now, I need to explain to you about the questions and comments because it's probably different from what you are used to. We are actually going to have a conversation, one person at a time, and our speakers are going to listen in on that conversation, and here's how that's going to work. There's people back there that are going to give out cards while you're listening to the presentation. If a question occurs to you, get your hand up. They will give you a card. It's got a number on it, okay? So when we have the question and comment period, if you're number one, you get to ask the first question. Here's the interesting thing. These guys are not going to answer your question directly. You have 2 minutes to say whatever you want to say. Question, comment, thoughts. If you're the third speaker or the third questioner, you can answer the first questioner if you know an answer to it. That's fine. At the end of this session then, each speaker will have a 10-minute wrap-up, and they can comment on any questions that they feel were unanswered or need more elaboration. So that's the way that this is going to run. I've seen it done in other workshops like this. What it really does is it brings out the expertise that's right in this room. There's a lot of smart people here. And there's no sense in going through and going through and going through and making the speakers go through it. We have a lot of good people right here. So that's what we're going to try. Are there any questions about that? I mean, just raise your hand if you have a question that occurs to you. They'll get a number to you, and we'll get it done. Okay? Yes, sir.
What if you have a question that's not addressed by your people that you need to, like you have a solution, but it's not brought up in any way, shape, or form. You need to attention.
Okay. You mentioned it during the question and answer period, and nobody answers it at all? Ask it again. Somebody up here will answer it for you. I'm sure that they will. Okay? All right. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce Karen Brennan, who's going to introduce our speakers.
Welcome. And on behalf of the Moravia citizens concerned about hydrofracking, I want to thank you for coming tonight to this panel presentation on this vitally important topic of high-volume hydraulic fracturing and its potential impacts on our communities. We are fortunate to have with us tonight 3 dedicated and very knowledgeable speakers who have given extensively of their time over the past 2 or 3 years educating communities about the many environmental risks created by this technology. First, I would like to introduce to you Joseph Heath. Joseph down in the end. Joe has been an attorney for 37 years and general counsel for the Onondaga Nation since 1982. For the nation, his work centers on environmental protection, particularly under the Clean Water Act, focusing on Onondaga Lake and Onondaga Creek. He works with land rights, hunting and fishing rights, and other related issues for the nation. In addition to his many talks to community groups, he has been educating landowners on how to terminate their leases and manage the many underhanded ways gas companies are seeking to extend old leases. In addition, Joe has extensive experience in civil rights litigation, constitutional law and protection of free speech and assembly, protection of abused and neglected children, and fighting domestic violence. Joe will be presenting first tonight, and will be giving an overview of the many issues we need to be concerned about. Next, we are pleased to have with us Dr. Bill Paducah, who is a physicist with research expertise in plasma confinement for fusion power generation. After looking that up, I decided he might have the future answers for all our problems. He has a lifelong interest in energy and environmental issues. In 2009, after learning about the impending gas drilling in the Marcellus Shale and doing much research, Dr. Paducah and his wife Sandy created the Marcellus Accountability Project for Tompkins County. The project's website, tcgasmap.org, has an extensive collection of articles on many different aspects of shale drilling and includes the first county-wide online map of gas leases in the state. Dr. Paducah chairs the steering committee for ROUSE, which is Residents Opposing Unsafe Shale Gas Drilling, that works to educate and protect residents from harm. Tonight, Dr. Paducah will address both the science and the economics of hydrofracking. Next, I'm happy to introduce to you someone who can speak to us about how gas drilling in our area could affect our health and that of our children. Mary Jane Utek, or MJ, as I learned she is called, has served as the Cortland County Health Department's Deputy Public Health Director for 12 years. She earned a Bachelor's of Nursing degree from Cornell University and master's degrees from both the University of California and the University of Maryland. She served 22 years in the U.S. Army Nurse Corps and now lives in Marathon. As you can see, our speakers are ready to impart their knowledge tonight, and so with further ado, I'm going to just turn it over to Joe and let them go.
Well, let's see how close. That works pretty well. Can you hear me? Okay. A lot to try to get over in 20 minutes, so let's see how we do with it. I'm going to try to cover briefly what fracking is. Actually, after seeing some of the comments in the December meeting in the article that I saw, most of you know this, but you want to make sure of that. Then I'm going to try to cover what it's not, some of the industry spin that we've heard. So I'll just try to get right into it. At first, most of us know now, the industry's fond of saying, oh, we've drilled in New York for almost 200 years and nothing's new. Well, that's not at all true. They've got all the easy gas. It used to be that they would drill a vertical well straight down, find a pocket of gas, pull all the gas out, and that's how they got the gas. Much more simple. They've got all that easy gas. Now the target are the shale formations, and there's more than the Marcellus. Most of you may know that. I'll get into that in a minute. And in order to get the gas out of shale, they have to break the shale up. It's in microscopic pockets within the shale. It's a rock formation, and so in order to get the gas out, they have to frack it, break it up, put sand in it, a lot of chemicals involved, hundreds of chemicals at each stage of the fracking, and then after it's broken up, the gas is supposed to flow back up the pipe and come out. That's if it works well. So this is, there's a couple of diagrams here. What they've been able to do in the last 10 or so years is to be able to turn their drill horizontally. The shale formations are horizontal, parallel with the surface, and they go out about a mile in every direction, and then they puncture holes in their pipe, and this is another diagram of the same thing. And this shows you a vertical well. They do some fracking with vertical wells, but because the shale is horizontal, they can't get very much gas this way. They get much more gas this way. Another diagram of the same thing. So the main thing that we really want to understand, this is a heavy industrial operation. I live in Preble in northern Cortland County. There's an old, what we call a grandfather's gas well about a mile from my house. You can put it on this table and plant flowers around it because it's so small. That's what most of us thought about 5 years ago when we first were signing leases and things like that. These are not your grandfather's gas wells. These are incredibly heavy industrial operations. This is a pad in Pennsylvania. Most of the slides that I'm going to show you in Pennsylvania are taken within the last year. You can see the size of this kind of an operation. This is where they put the drilling mud. All of this creates a tremendous amount of waste. These are the compressors. All of this is diesel engines running 24/7, about 1,500 horsepower diesel engines. These are a series of compressors that are hooked up to combine to create the pressure necessary to frack the shale. Again, diesel engines running 24/7. This is a cover of Scientific America. You can see the size of the operation. This is what comes out when they frack. They like to call this frack water. That's not water in my opinion, and it's not what you want anywhere near your water well, or your livestock, or anywhere near your house. And this is where they store what comes out of the well, at least in Pennsylvania. Now the DEC is saying we're thinking of making them put it in steel tanks. That would certainly be a step in the right direction, because these days in Pennsylvania, all of that toxic waste that comes out when they drill, when they frack, there are hundreds of chemicals used in the fracking, some of them biocides, carcinogenic chemicals. I'm sure MJ will get back to that a little more. It's stored in open pits lined with plastic. And what we see, this is some of the residue from the chemicals in the sand. Trucks have to empty those pits. The trucks rip the plastic, and the toxic leak into the aquifers. So that's a brief overview of how heavy industrialized this practice is. You do not want it near your house. And what we need to understand in New York is that these are the shale formations around the United States that they're going to, they want to frack. The Barnett in Texas, and you can see that combined Utica and Marcellus is by far the biggest area in the country. That's why we're at ground zero. That's why they're targeting our area. Now we hear a lot about the Marcellus shale, and that's because that's what's being drilled now in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio. But when they come up to our neck of the woods, they're not going to be after the Marcellus because the Marcellus is too shallow to frack. It's got to be at least 2,000 feet below the ground for them to frack. This is a map taken out of the DEC's original list, guys. And this line, you probably can't read it in back. This is 1,000-foot depth of the Marcellus. You can see that it's too shallow to frack here.
Did you move backwards?
Well, I'm not sure where. Is that better? Okay, sorry. So they're not after the Marcellus here. So why have they signed all these leases? Because of the Utica. This is the Utica share. And you can see here, this is 4,000 feet, 3,000 feet. They could frack that. And so that's what they're after. Now, a couple of quick slides of other counties. This is a map that my office helped put together of Onondaga County. This is Cortland County. 48% of the land in our county is fracked, is leased. We're fracked. And when the paper released this is put together by the county planning department. When the paper released this, they said it's 48% of the area of the county is fracked. 8% of the number of landowners leased those 48%, because it's mostly large landowners. And if you calculate the property, as many people don't own property as do, we probably have less than 5% of our county leasing out half. The reason that I'm concerned is the reason that all of you should be concerned, is that I have a private well. It sits in this sole source aquifer. Actually, the aquifer is bigger. It has this recharge area. And so one mistake in the aquifer Most of you probably have either private wells, or I'm told that the village of Moravia has 3 wells that go into a pretty shallow aquifer of about 30 feet. That's the problem here, because this practice has polluted aquifers, and I'll come back to that in a minute. This is Cayuga County. These are the frac leases in Cayuga. So that's a brief overview. From the comments I saw before, most of you already know this, and that's a good thing, because if this is going to come to your community, the more that people know. So the industry is fond of saying all of these things. Oh, this is safe, it's green, it's a nice transition fuel from coal to when we might get to renewables in the future. It's not properly regulated, it's not democratic. We just went through those numbers in Portland County. It infringes upon the rights of landowners. It's not about energy independence. I'll come back to that in a minute. And we really need to face the problem that we have of global climate change and our fossil fuel habit, and take this opportunity. This is really a Sputnik moment. Some of us remember that from the 50s when we were challenged. We need to face this problem that the world is cooking at a rate. How many of you can remember a winter like this? I'm from northern Oswego County, and even in Redfield, where they get 400 inches a year, they don't have any snow. Now that may be an aberration, but we all know that the climate is cooking, and it's cooking because we use too many fossil fuels. And switching from one fossil fuel to another is not the answer that we owe our children and our grandchildren. And so I'm going to talk briefly about what we really need to do about renewables. So, fracking is not safe. This is a picture from the front of the Post-Standard, the Syracuse paper. Many people can now light their wells in frack country because the methane migrates. This is a very explosive property that we're dealing with, and so there's always fires and things like that. Dimmick, Pennsylvania. Most of us have heard about Dimmick. There's just another tragic development there where the EPA said one day we're going to give them water. Dimmick is in northeastern Pennsylvania, I believe, where a couple dozen wells have been ruined by a Cabot Oil Company, and the methane from those wells leaked into their water, and they have no water. Well, they don't have usable water. And so this is how they have to live. These are vents that have to come out of their water wells in order for them not to explode. We have a series of pictures that were taken by my office today. Vents again. So those of us who live on wells, just think what your life is like when you can't use the water. You can't wash your dishes, you can't take a shower, you can't feed your livestock. You don't have much left when that happens. And that's what's happening to people in Pennsylvania, not only in Dimmick, where these pictures are taken. So then they have to bring in these so-called water buffaloes, where they have one set of water that's non-potable. When you have something like this outside in the winter, you have electric bills in the $600 or $700 range. That's what's going on with people in Pennsylvania right now. Another water container in somebody's garage, and people showing the number of water containers. So, just this week, actually 2 days ago, the Scranton newspaper just revealed another problem that Cabot created in another town in Pennsylvania. And when I saw this a couple days ago, I said, I got to get these slides into my So, and this illustrates a number of problems. Methane in 3 private wells in Lenox Township seeped from a flawed gas well drilled by Cabot Oil and Gas. Regulators have found. This was a 1,400-foot space between the wells and the water wells. So then this happened in August, and yet it's not revealed until January, and we'll come back to that. So then they put a video down one of the wells. There's 3 wells that they've now figured out have leaked. I do a lot of lease workshop too. So they put a video down the well, and they documented that So the DEC is very fond of telling us that we're going to make them put 3 layers of pipe and cement, and that'll protect us. These wells had 3 layers of pipe and cement, and they failed. And they documented that they had methane in the cement between the layers of pipe. And that's what it says down here. Methane was also found between the cemented casings of the 3 Cabot wells. And so they had to install methane detection devices in these wells. How well do you think you'd sleep at night if you needed to have a methane detection device in your house? And you had to worry about whether or not your house or your water well was going to blow up. That's what people are going through in Pennsylvania right now. This is the notice of violation that the DEP sent back in September to Cabot. This is the text of some of the text of that notice of violation. The combustible gas was found in the headspace of the wells. What a nightmare to have that much methane in your water well. It was also documented in various casing strings of the wells, and the violations that they specifically mentioned that they have caused or allowed gas from lower formations to enter into fresh groundwater. The problem is they drill through our aquifers to get down into the shale, and when the casing fails, and casings fail, Schlumberger is one of the biggest companies in this, they have a whole website devoted to the fact that these cement casings fail. At least 50% of them fail over a lifetime. And then what happens is that the methane and the frac chemicals can migrate into people's homes and wells. And they failed to report this. And the paper had to, so this is September that they wrote the notice of violation. Nobody found out about it until January when the Scranton paper kept after the DEP. Their own rules say they're supposed to post that kind of document within 10 days, and yet they didn't do it. So that's the problem with the regulators. They're overworked, and they can't even keep up with their own regulations. So that's one proof of how unsafe fracking is. Another way we can see this, and there's more written about this than when I first developed these slides. The SEC, which is not exactly the most, some people call them a toothless tiger, but they do have rules. And when companies are mandated to advise their investors when there's risk involved in the company's business that might in fact affect their investment. And so this is taken from an SEC filing from Range Resources. Every company in fracking, it warns their investors of these dangers. There's been quite a few articles written lately about my favorite company, Chesapeake. They're the ones that leased most of Cortland and Onondaga County. They're the ones bullying people on their leases. Chesapeake has the same stuff in their SEC filings. So this is what they tell their investors. And those of you with leases, I defy you to find any of this in any lease. I've looked at over 400 leases over the last year trying to help homeowners figure out whether or not they can get out of them. And not one of them tells the homeowner what you're going to have if they come and frack on your property. So they don't tell you that, although you may well end up like these poor people in Pennsylvania, but they tell their investors. And this is what they say. This is what they admit about their own industrial practice. Oil and gas operations are subject to many risks, including well blowouts, explosions, fire, pipeline ruptures, pollution, release of toxic gases, and other environmental injury, loss of life, severe damage to property, natural resources, equipment, pollution of other environmental damages. You got to have cleanups. You're going to have regulatory problems. You may even have to suspend your operations, like Cabot. When you pollute people's wells, you have to get a suspension. And as we begin to drill into deeper horizons in more geologically complex areas, we could experience a greater increase in operational and financial risk due to inherently high reservoir pressures and unknown downhole exposures. This is a very industrial, dangerous activity. And they admit it when they have to. One other set of proof around how dangerous it is. This is a letter written by the Council of Scientific Society presidents, 150 different disciplines, representing 1.5 million people, scientists, and it was written last May, 2 Mays ago now, to the president, saying that some energy systems which are promoted to help climate change have not received adequate scrutiny and may aggravate global warming. We'll come back to how prescient this was, to a greater extent than commonly appreciated. And they specifically mentioned the development of diffuse gas and shale formations as an example where energy policy has moved ahead without adequate base in objective science. And Bill will help us catch up on the science in it. And finally, they said prior, thorough, science-based studies are required to evaluate the impact of massive shale developments on rural land uses, water supply, quantity, and full life cycle of greenhouse gas emissions. Some of this will come back. One last, I think this is the last piece of why it's not safe. This is an active DEC environmental technician wrote a letter to the Watertown Times, a paper after, dear to my heart, I delivered it for 8 years up in northern Oswego County. That's when they could get down through the snow, when it still snowed. This is actually a very serious letter. It lasted about a month ago. And this is an environmental technician, still works for DEC. I have managed scores of underground remediation projects, reviewed countless hydrological reports. I've seen thousands of lab reports from contaminated wells. Gee, there's not supposed to be any contaminated wells, but he's reviewed thousands of lab reports from them. And I'm familiar with the fate and transport of contamination in fractured media. Let me be clear. Hydraulic fracturing as it's practiced today will contaminate our aquifers, where we get our water. Not might contaminate, will contaminate New York aquifers. If you were looking for a way to poison the drinking water supply here in the Northeast, you could not find a more chillingly effective and thorough method of doing so than hydraulic fracturing. That's a DEC term. This is a diagram taken from the New York City's comments 2 years ago to the first ash ice. And it shows that these underground formations are not, that things migrate underground. That when you're creating all this pressure down here and you're hoping that the gas will come up here, that it will find natural faults and travel this way. This is the New York City that created this thing. So, this is the Schlumberger that I talked about, and the fact that, so we're drilling down through our drinking water aquifer, and we're told that, well, we're going to use multiple casings and then cement between them. I don't know how many of you work with cement, but when I had my union laborers book back in the 60s, and we poured concrete for the roads, we couldn't pour a drop of concrete without a state inspector right there. When we poured it in the walls, we had to use a vibrator because we know it doesn't just fill up spaces. That's not how they create these wells. Schlumberger, which again is one of the largest companies in the industry, clearly says that all cement fails sooner or later. And we may have a close-up of this. So what they do is they drill a certain 1,000 feet or so, then they come down to the bottom, and they pull the drill bit out, they pump cement down through the bottom, and then hope that it comes back up the sides, all the way back up. Here's a close-up of how they hope that it's going to come back up. And that's the problem with cementing. And then as you put pressure in there, constant pressure, constant changing pressure, and you frac again and again, you again stress the steel casings and the concrete, and it leaks. And then you get the problem that we had. The Susquehanna River is now one of the most endangered rivers in the world, in the country, as a result of them dumping wastewater into it. So that's some of the problems of water pollution. We don't hear much yet about air pollution. It's a major problem. It's so bad that in the Wyoming frac fields, where there are, you know, more animals than people, the ozone is so bad in the frac fields in Wyoming that it's higher than in downtown LA. John Hanger, who's the former DEP commissioner in Pennsylvania, who has just ignored the issues of water pollution, still writes about how there's no problems about water pollution despite the daily revelations about what's going on in Pennsylvania. This is John Hanger saying, and this is, well, it's May now. Some of these are getting dated. He says that a large new source of smog-forming emissions along the northeast corridor will be caused by fracking. It won't fit in the northeast. It won't happen. There'll be lawsuits from New York, New Jersey, and elsewhere. And this is when we're already experiencing the highest rates of asthma in history in our cities. So let me now switch to how it's not green. Now clearly, gas burns cleaner than coal at the moment of ignition. I'm not going to deny that. Neither do these two Cornell scientists, Robert Howarth and Tony Nglafi. Last March, they revealed a peer-reviewed study, and most of the studies that the industry relies on are not peer-reviewed. Bill can explain what that means. And what they found, because of the leakage of methane that is inherent in the process of producing frac gas, that frac gas is actually worse for climate change than burning coal. And that's because methane is 105 times worse for climate change over a 20-year period. And if we don't fix this climate problem in 20 years, we will have failed. It's 105 times worse, according to these Cornell scientists in their peer reviews. And so when you factor in the entire life cycle of producing frac gas, which is all those diesel engines that we saw to drill, compress, frac, and then when you get it out, you have to put it into the pipe, and you have to pump that, you have to compress it, you have 8,000 trucks per well bringing the chemicals and equipment in and out, so you have that CO2, and then you have the methane. This is when they reported it last March. This is an article. This is the graph that shows it the best. This is frac gas. The purple line is the impact of methane on climate change. This is coal over here. This is frac gas, shale gas. Worse for climate change than coal. Now there are other problems with coal. Nobody is saying that we should be continuing mountaintop destruction, but it is not a bridge fuel to a cleaner future. It's a bridge to nowhere. And that's why we have to understand that we have to find a way to use renewables. I just saw a DVD about mountaintop removal, and in order to save a mountain in West Virginia, they put up windmills to create the equivalent amount of power. And that's because when you drill a well, you don't know when the gas is going to come up, and they flare it off. I think I have a slide about the practice of this in North Dakota, where they're fracking shale to produce oil, and the gas is just a byproduct. And they flare it off. It's not properly regulated. We'll just go through this briefly. First of all, the industry is exempt from most of the provisions of most of the federal environmental laws, the Clean Water Act, Clean Drinking Water Act, Clean Air Act, Superfund, RCRA, which is a solid waste law. That's the 2005 Halliburton loophole. DEC has the same three conflicts that Minerals and MMS had that led to the Deepwater Horizon. They are required to promote the development of gas, then they're supposed to regulate it. It sounds a little contradictory to me, but then on top of that, they're also leasing state land for profit. Three-way conflict. There's only 17 people in the unit to regulate and inspect this industry. It just can't be done. That's why so many towns are turning to their own police powers and their own zoning powers to first put in moratoriums and then ban it. It's not democratic. These are huge international corporations. You have a very small percentage of people leasing the land. You have compulsory integration. We have bullying by companies during lease extension. You have eminent domains for pipelines. And I'm rushing through this because I don't want to use up, I probably have used up my time. It's not about energy independence, and this is really important. We just found a letter from Skelos, is the majority leader of the Senate. His law partner is a major lobbying shrill for the industry. He just wrote the Iraq Veterans Against the War, an organization that I work with and have helped some of the young veterans through, and said, you really ought to get behind fracking because it'll keep us out of the Middle East. Well, it's not about that at all. And Chesapeake, again, is the great example of that. Because what they're doing now, they've drilled so much gas, the gas is very cheap, and their profits are down. And so what Chesapeake has done is they're selling interest in our gas to foreign corporations. I read an article within the last 24 hours that $8 billion was invested in the shale interest in the United States by foreign corporations, many of them from China. But here's some examples of Chesapeake. They sold all of their interest in the Fayette Shale to BHP Billiton, it's an Australian company, for $4.75 billion. So they gather up all of our leases, like their monopoly houses, and then they've got a commodity that they can sell off, $4.75 billion. They've sold 32.5% of every lease they have in New York to a Norwegian company, Statoil. They got $3.7 billion for that. And they've just sold, within the last month or so, 25% of their Utica Shale leases to Total, which is a French company and the third largest power company in Europe. Here's $51 billion, according to this article that was reflected in the Syracuse paper recently. And so what they're telling their investors is, we've got a cure for cheap gas. We can sell it for twice as much in Europe and Asia. They're going to sell our gas overseas to increase their corporate profits. It's not about energy independence, it's about corporate profits. Shear Energy just obtained, and now they're obtaining federal permits. And Shear Energy is important because it's one of the members of its board, John Deutsch, is on Chew's frack gas panel advising the federal government about fracking. And they just got a permit to export our gas. And so we need to start thinking about our children and our grandchildren and what's going to be left here in the Finger Lakes 50 and 100 years from now. This is a small vertical access wind turbine, 8 feet high, 8 feet tall, can generate and around. It can be put on a house. We're trying to get one located on our house, even though we have a very small lot. It'll generate power with 3 miles an hour of wind. This is what we need to do. We need to use American ingenuity to create energy for our children that isn't going to ruin our water and our lakes and our air. We all know about these kinds of wind turbines. This is my basement. We put in a geothermal heating unit. Now, most of my house is cluttered because I just can't have time to pick up. But this is geothermal. We drill 2 holes down into the ground, 340 feet, and we get water that's at a constant temperature. It has a heat exchanger. This is how we heat and cool our house. So, lease termination, we'll have to come back into the lease termination workshop. This is a little bit complicated. This is a great, but I'm lucky enough to live on a small glacier lake, and I hope that's not how I have to make this. So this is how you can get a hold of me, and I hope that that gives you some idea of some of the problems that we're facing if fracking comes here. Thank you very much for listening.